have to start and you have to be learning. You have to like you take those lessons from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing. And often, recently through the recession and the tough business times, I've been saying to clients like, hey, don't forget, like we get these lessons, like no one can take them from us. And yet we might not have made as much money and it might have been harder, but we have this lesson, and people who didn't start don't have it.
Luke, I want to move on to compounding interest. So you're getting asked these questions. You're feeling maybe, Kiwis really need to be clued up, understand it. I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, I got a good example for you because I've just finished doing my month end for the end of the financial year, like a true accountant.
Yeah.
And I have two funds, right? So one of them is $100,000 invested into a fund, and basically it kicks me out a monthly payment. So part of my investing journey has been to create drops of income so that I was trying to build a way that I was getting paid every week from something. So some people would like compounding and they wouldn't use that. They would basically just continue to build that. But I was like, no, I want to have like a drip coming in. So it pays me a decent amount each month. And then I stacked up some more cash and went back to the same people and said, okay, here's 50 grand, but don't pay me the monthly amount.
Or reinvest it.
Yeah, reinvest it. And so over the last year, very rough figures, like the 100 grand has paid me out a decent amount of coin. But the 50 grand, well, you can probably work backwards to what it'd be, but the 50 grand is now $55,000 after tax. So good returns as well, and then paying tax on it. But the 100 grand effectively is now worth less, right? Because it's gone backwards due to inflation. I think over the last 25 years, average inflation rate's 2.6%. So I've had the money each month, and I have to ask myself each month, okay, if you want this money, what are you actually doing with it? Because all that you create is lifestyle creep and epic to have these flows of money. And so even, to go back to why I started doing it to then the person you become, you're like, oh, okay. So now I normally invest that into different areas as it comes in.
That's interesting because when you said you're paying yourself out the income, I wondered whether it was the human psychology element where like as that drip starts to grow over time, it motivates you to go like, I want my investments to continue to grow, because mathematically you've got income, you actually don't need that passive income. Is that the idea that like you like to see like the reward for the effort and the delayed gratification?
I liked to see it subsidizing some of my costs for my life. And then I could validate that, okay, I'm not really paying 100% of my rent.
Yeah.
Actually, this fund provider is with whatever they're doing with the money. And I found that quite a fun concept to then start going, oh, I don't pay for the gym anymore. I don't pay for this. Like by investing, what expenses could I take out of my life because now someone's paying them for me? But I emailed them yesterday and basically said, hey, compound it. I don't need that each month. So I flipped back to the whole lot will be compounding and growing.
Because such a big part of it is there is the numbers side of mathematically what gets you the most ahead, but the bit that holds most people back is the person, and the person being consistent and contributing. And if the answer is opposed to, like, if somebody asks me, should I take the income or should I reinvest? I'll go, well, if you're working, reinvest. But if it is something like my goal is to pay for my gym and then pay for my power, and that motivates you to keep going and stay on track, I would argue do it, because like the biggest thing is just making sure that you get where you need to get to.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing with all finance and investing and whatnot is really it comes back to what we want. But I think it's very easy to get generalized information or especially when you get started, like you should be doing this or you should be doing that. And so then you go down that path. And I've kind of gone a path of I'm going to test some of these things and try them and see what it feels like.
Yeah, I think as well, people often fall into that trap when they're paying off debt. Like a lot of financial advice is you start with the highest interest rate first and you keep going down. I'm like, yeah, that works mathematically, but sometimes people need to get some runs on the board. Like maybe you just need to click off a $500 credit card first and then do something else. So you just like, okay, I'm actually getting some traction here.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you could clear a small debt, but what's the second, the third and fourth order consequences of that? So you might get a victory and be like, well, I can do this.
Yeah.
But it also might be the difference between you not getting another 12 emails from them, and that's what you use to spend. Oh, it's only a $2,000 limit. Who cares? But then you're getting bombarded by these promotional emails and sales and 48 hours, and you go, okay, another pair of shoes at 200 versus $2,000. I even saw a credit card statement the other day from a client, and it was a $5,000 credit card. They were 2.5 into it. And the way I read it, I was like, oh, you've got 2.5 grand on this credit card. I was like, oh, do you put more money onto the credit card and just spend it off it? They were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, I can't read the statement. And I'm a chartered accountant. It was so well worded. I'm like, your credit card's in credit.
Yeah.
It's called marketing.
Amazing.
Mate, that's psychology. That's getting into it.
Yeah. I'm wasting money here. I need to spend it. So coming back to the compounding returns bit, your boy, hung out in the spreadsheets a little bit before this and did some quick numbers on compounding returns. So just to show, like, say you've got $20,000 a year to invest, which is $400 a week. Let's say that you regularly contributed that and made a 4%, what we call net real return. So that net real is very important when we're thinking about returns, because like the example of the 25-year-old who's going, I'm making 10 or 20%. That is not average. You will have a year where like it's amazing. But what you really need to do is go, okay, I make 10%, I take off, let's just call it 1% for fees, 3% for tax, 3% for inflation. Your net real return's probably more like 3 or 4%. If you regularly contribute that money over a 20-year period, $20,000 a year, $400 a week turns into $600,000 if you regularly invest it. Do you know what the number is if you just leave the money in the bank?
It's probably gone backwards.
Yeah, about 350K.
Yeah.
But so on that calculation though, so when you take off tax, how are you taxing it when it's a capital gain?
Very good question, right? Because I get that all the time as well, right? Like the New Zealand-based investments and that there's no capital gains tax within New Zealand. There is a portion of your portfolio within New Zealand, but it would be very silly to have all of your portfolio sitting in New Zealand for, I mean, I'm sure you get it all the time, right? As an accountant. People make decisions for tax over the right investment decisions first. So obviously if you're investing overseas, there's a lot of complicated calculations out there, but you're paying tax on those overseas investments.
Yeah, and I think like KiwiSaver is an example, just for rough, math, is that 70% of KiwiSaver funds are invested into offshore shares, right? So you're talking about like fifth taxes, because I think that's what people get confused with, is they think, well, why would I clear my debt at 6% when I can get 10% in the S&P 500 or whatever it may be that they're looking at? And I guess that's and even in accounting terms, people will go and borrow money and we'll say, well, it's always a good idea to borrow money if you can then use that debt to then, buy a digger or turn it into income, and it generates more of a return than the cost of the debt, right? And that's what most people are trying to do with debt. But I think people don't run the numbers and they don't look at this stuff. And so they do get themselves confused or down one path and not the other.
Yeah, I still think it really comes back to, the longer I do this, the more I think it's not actually about mathematically what's right. It's about the person. Another huge example is around revolving credits. Yeah. So people go like, oh, I'm saving $500 a week and I want to have some flexibility just in case I have an emergency. So I'm going to pay off my revolving credit. But then we get to the time that they do their review, and because it's not structured, it's not automated.
Yeah, they never go anywhere, like, or we'll get people that, online there's this like fancy, you spend on a credit card and you get the interest free and then you pay it off with this and you shift it into a revolving credit. I'm like, mathematically that works. But, 99% of the time, people will implement this strategy, and then I will speak to them probably 2 years after when they come and look for another strategy, and they just haven't gone anywhere, because it's too complex. It's not simple enough. It's not structured enough for them.
I think as well, like, because you talk about this really well, I think often when I hear you talking about how revolving credit is such a good product, but like it probably wouldn't exist if the banks, knew that it was really good. Like we psychologically, and I see this with our clients with tax. We are, at the moment, just gone back through terminal taxes due, and I'll have a look at these clients, and they've had $138 of tax to pay, $55, $593 or whatever. And I've told them, like when we've done the accounts, you should probably just clear it now. Then it's done. But then it's like, oh, but I've got till the 7th of April. So why would I give them my money? Like, and we do the same thing. Like, I'm going to pay my GST on the very last day. I'm like, bro, you just wasted more time thinking about this than actually sending an email to a lead, following up a prospect, something like that, But I think we're always like looking, how do we game the system? Which just, the longer you stay there, then it actually becomes very hard to, go down another path of, okay, how can I think bigger than that?
Yeah.
To go a step further than that, some of the clients who do have, a few $1,000s of tax to pay, even tens of thousands, I'll say, okay, you're not obligated to pay it for a year, or maybe it's 9 months, but you might want to think about clearing some of it or setting up an automatic payment, because I know that when April comes around, there's a risk that A, you don't have the cash, or B, you're going to hate letting go of 20 grand. Like how often in your life do you just transfer 20 G's out? And so I try and put it back into, okay, how often does this happen? Do you know what it's going to feel like? And so many times I've got into the April or a month before and it's like, oh, hey, this has happened.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to
finance this.
Yeah. What are our options?
Yeah. I've got an AP set up for the business to pay tax weekly, just because it would actually stress me out. Like if I go, I've got GST, I've got provisional tax coming out, I'm trying to work out dividend payments, all that kind of thing. Like you want that stuff just going out.
What was the first one? GS what?
Banks don't pay GST.
One of us pays GST, one of us doesn't pay
Of
GST.
course.
Yeah. It's funny because every time you get a GST invoice, it's this like real chunky number. And it, like talking to your point before where you're like, how often do you just transfer 20 grand out? I watch him every time he gets one. He's like, God damn it. I don't have to go through that. I'm like, oh man, like that must suck.
Yeah. And that's every like 2 months, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about like what it would be if I had to pay it, like, the provisional tax or end of year tax, that big payment. That would hurt way more. I pay it weekly. I don't feel it at all.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
So I got a question, an email from a listener going, James, I've heard you talk about compounding returns in year 10 and year 1 and year 3 and year 3, and then you compare it to a mortgage of 5.5%. And he goes to me, your logic is flawed in a very nice way. Your logic is flawed. You absolutely have no idea what you're talking about. No, I'm just joking about that. He said something about me being good looking. I can't remember all of it. Yeah. But he said,
How often do you email yourself? Is that like a
nice?
Yeah. Love the emails from mum.
Yeah.
He was like, you haven't applied inflation to the mortgage. So actually, the mortgage rate less inflation is your net return. Which I think is a question I do get asked quite a bit, is why do you apply inflation to shares but not to mortgage? And mortgage is not just inflationary, it's deflationary, right? You're paying for something with future dollars with something that doesn't move. And then another example is when it comes to investing into shares, at some point you're going to spend that money in the future, right? Which is why you have to apply inflation. But when it comes to the mortgage on your own home, you're never going to spend that money.
Yeah. And to simplify what James just said to something that's easily digestible, if you think about inflation on a mortgage and paying for something with future dollars, let's say your grandparents bought a house, I don't know, anywhere in Auckland for $50,000. If they never paid that $50,000 off, and you look at the mortgage versus the value of the house now, yes, the value of the house might have gone up, but $50,000 now is a lot less than what it was back in the day. And that's a really easy way to digest inflation and how that kind of relates to mortgages.
Money's becoming worth less. Yeah.
It is. It feels like at an increasing rate, but that might just be the time right now, right? Inflation. Yeah. Instead of seeing long term at 3%, I know at the start of my career, inflation was pretty much nothing.
I think the other thing with that as well, though, right? You said it's that short term thing. Inflation feels really high at the moment because cost of living is going up, and it has been high previously. It is coming back down to normal levels, but it is still sitting out there.
Yeah. The other thing, like in terms of the inflation, Luke, that I think about is people talk about inflation being at a much more normal rate now, but when you did like 4, 7, and 4, and prices jumped like 20%, right? People still have to deal with that. The prices are still up 20% what they were a few years ago.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people think that prices just go back to what they used to, right?
Be nice.
Even one of the good things I think, it's not exactly great, but through this boom and bust of the economy, so many people have learnt so much. And I've been speaking a little bit at the moment, and I'm like, hey, can you please name for me the Reserve Bank governor before Adrian Orr? And everyone's like, And, not that long ago, people probably didn't know what the Reserve Bank was, the official cash rate, how that impacted interest rates, inflation, the cost of living. It wasn't that long ago that the media were pushing Jacinda Ardern saying, are we in a cost of living crisis? I refute that, we are not. And we didn't want to use the word crisis. Then next thing, it's just like everyday slang. And then in Australia, I think they call it like the cosy lives or something. But it's like we're living in a crisis effectively, which is not a great way to live.
No. So we talked about compounding returns, how that impacts with the mortgage. Luke, I want to talk about other types of compounding returns, right? Because it's not just where it comes to your money.
Well, I got two good examples re compounding that I think help people understand this. So I often say action leads to action, and let's do. I'll go my example first, and then bring you guys to your example. So when I got to university, I was 17, and I walked out the back of my flat, and there was a feijoa tree, and I thought, oh, sweet. Let's take those feijoas and sell them at the front of the gate. But my flatmates didn't suggest to do that, but they helped. And then I couldn't get enough attention on the feijoas, so I got a road cone, and then I get a mate to draw a sign for me because I don't have any artist skills. And slowly people are going past and like selling out all of the feijoas. Now, I think I do that because earlier in my life, we'd been very resourceful, firewood, pine cones, stuff like that, like learning little ways to make money. And then we then go, right, we need more bags. So we go to New World, get more of those. We have to find more feijoa trees. Then we have people complaining the feijoas aren't good enough because they're different quality to the first lot. So I'm like learning effectively about business. But then I take some of those lessons and they're all still the same as what I have to do now. Like you have to have a good product. People have to be happy with it. You've got to get their attention. You've got to be solving a problem for them. Like a dude would knock on our door at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. And
where are the feijoas, mate?
Yeah. Well, like, mate, we've like been home 3 hours spending the feijoa process. And
I've got feijoa vodka.
So anyway, I was back in Palmerston North the other day, and I told when I spoke at school, and I was telling the high boys about how one of them asked like, "What was your first business venture?" And I told them about that, and I said, "Lads, like we took that money and we compounded it into the S&P 500, and it's now worth 200 grand." And they're like, "Mike, no, we took it to the pokies and we rinsed it." And they're like, that's like basically the only thing they remember from our presentation. But I said, it's another good lesson that even if you make it, it doesn't really matter if you then just get it and then go give it to somebody else. Anyway, I was telling mum's like, oh, let's go drive past your old flat. Go past there. Well, somebody with more, entrepreneurial thinking with me and probably some other compounding lessons has gone, why do we have a feijoa tree on the back of this section? This section is a waste. And what have they done? They've bowled that and they've built it. They've built a house on the back. And they've probably sold that off. So they've probably brought the section that we used to live in. And I'm like, holy shit, we can make some money off these feijoas. Someone's gone, we can buy the whole section, infill it, put a house there, bang, make 600 rack in Palmerston North or something. And like, I didn't have those skills because I wasn't compounding those lessons to be there. But I doubt that someone just walked past one day and went like, oh, I could do that. They'd been compounding the knowledge that that was possible. And it's much like your guys' journey where you've probably gone interested in a space, you learn a lot about it, you get into property investing, you compound some extra equity, and then it's like, let's really balloon this shit. And I think you buy 20,000 units in Wellington or something like that. Right?
15,000, but
But I think it's a good example how you have to start and you have to be learning. You have to like you take those lessons from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing. And often, recently through the recession and the tough business times, I've been saying to clients like, hey, don't forget, like we get these lessons, like no one can take them from us. And yet we might not have made as much money and it might have been harder, but we have this lesson and people who didn't start don't have it. And we could apply it in a future year. We might do things differently when we see things turning, but no one can take those lessons from us and they will compound as something in the future. It just doesn't feel like it at the moment.